I pulled the tarp off and just stood there. Dust everywhere. One headlight hanging loose. The paint had gone from white to a dull, chalky gray, like the car had been forgotten on purpose. This was my new project. A 1986 Toyota AE86 hatchback, sitting on stock wheels with worn tires and a windshield so cracked I could barely see through it. I wanted to turn this forgotten AE86 into a real drift machine. Not a show car, not a garage decoration, a car built to slide sideways, the way these chassis were always meant to. The AE86 became a legend in drift culture for one simple reason: lightweight, rear-wheel drive, and a chassis that rewards a driver who knows how to control a slide instead of fighting it. I found it through a guy clearing out his late father's garage. Nobody wanted it. The interior smelled like old rain. Rust had eaten through part of the rear quarter panel, and the front bumper was missing entirely. But the floor pans were solid, and that's the one thing you can't fix easily on these cars. Everything else I could build. The first few nights in my garage were just cleaning. Years of grime, dead leaves jammed in the cowl, a battery that had corroded itself into the tray. I wiped down the dash, pulled the seats, and got my first real look at what I was working with. Stock 4AGE engine, still in the bay, seized solid. No surprise there. Here's where the real decision came in. Do I rebuild the factory engine, or do I swap it? For a serious drift build, I went with an SR20DT swap, a turbocharged 2.0-liter four-cylinder out of a Nissan Silvia, known for being strong, tunable, and relatively easy to fit into an AE86 chassis. It's one of the most common swaps in this community for a reason. Pulling the old 4AGE out was satisfying in a strange way. Watching the empty engine bay sit there, waiting for something better. I spent 2 weekends just fabricating mounts, because nothing bolts in clean on a swap like this. You measure twice, weld once, and you still end up redoing half of it anyway. While the engine sat on a stand getting cleaned and inspected, I moved to the exterior. New paint first. A deep, matte panda-style two-tone that a lot of AE86 builds wear as a tribute to the Sprinter Truno look. I dropped the car on a set of coilovers, which are adjustable suspension components that let you control ride height and stiffness independently. For drifting, you want it low, but not so low you lose suspension travel mid-slide. New wheels went on next. Lightweight, deep dish, wrapped in tires narrower than you expect. Drift setups often run skinnier rear rubber on purpose, because less grip back there means easier, more controllable slides. I added a front lip and a small trunk spoiler. Nothing extreme, just enough to clean up the lines without turning the car into a showpiece. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. After getting the SR20DT mounted and wired, I fired it up for the first start, and it ran rough for about 4 seconds before dying completely. My stomach dropped. I'd already spent more money than I planned, and now something in the fuel system wasn't right. Turned out to be a bad ground on the fuel pump relay. Something so small it took me a full weekend of late nights to trace down. Once that was sorted, the SR20DET came alive properly. I paired it with a Garrett turbocharger for boost and an HGS exhaust to let it breathe. Turbo lag is something every boosted build deals with. It's that short delay between pressing the throttle and the turbo actually building boost pressure. With the right turbo sizing, you minimize it, but you never fully erase it. Inside, I went simple but functional. A set of bucket seats, a proper harness, a smaller diameter steering wheel for quicker hand movements mid-slide, and a strut bar up front to tighten the chassis. I left most of the dash alone. This car didn't need to look like a race car inside to drive like one. The first real test came at a local meet, not a competition, just a parking lot session with a few other builders. I eased into a slide for the first time and felt the rear step out, the SR20DT pulling through the corner with a sound this chassis never made from the factory. It wasn't perfect. I caught it late, overcorrected, nearly clipped a curve, but it was sideways, and it was mine. Dyno Day told the real story. We strapped it down, ran it through the poles, and watched the number climb on screen. 410 horsepower, a number that would have sounded impossible the day I pulled that tarp off a dead, rusted hatchback. The graph spiked, The shop went quiet for a second, and then somebody laughed and said it sounded angrier than it looked. People asked why I didn't just buy a finished drift car. There are plenty out there, ready to go, no welding required. But there's something about pulling a forgotten chassis out of someone's garage, watching it sit there lifeless, and slowly giving it a reason to exist again. Every bolt I turned, every late night chasing a wiring fault, all of it is in this car now. This build has roots that go back to the Cuba circuit and the early days of Japanese drift culture, where cars exactly like this one first proved that control mattered more than raw power. I think about that every time I back into a corner and let the rear end swing wide. I pulled the tarp off a dead car covered in dust, one headlight hanging, paint gone gray with neglect. Now I pull a tarp off a car that's alive every time I open that garage door, and somehow, it still feels like the same moment, just finally finished.